Hello there, it's Ben Bowers, the Spirit Specialist, and I'm here today to talk to you about the latest seasonal release from Lochlea. We've got the Fallow Edition, and because I have it in my hands, I'm actually going to call it Fallow and not Farrow like I ended up calling it most other times. So this is the third of the 4 seasonal releases that tie in with the farming year, with Lochlea being a farm distillery. As you can see, quite a dark colour on this. So we initially had Sowing, then we had Harvest, and then we have Fallow, and then the fourth and final is going to be Ploughing. And it's possible that this might come out around Burns Night next year, so January 25th, 2023. It was Burns Night this year that the first release of Lochlea launched, so it would tie in quite nicely to have the last of the seasonal editions being a year on from when the first one came out. I'm really looking forward to tasting this. I'm a big Sherry Bomb fan. I really like Lochlea. If you've seen my previous videos, I've been really impressed with how they've managed to get sort of a house style quite quickly. Very much kind of like cereal forward. It really reminds me of kind of standing in fields of grain. And I'd be very interested to see what the sherry influence is on this. So this is first fill Oloroso Sherry casks. We have 9,000 bottles available of this globally. It's exactly the same price as the previous 2. So before I tell you what it tastes like, let me give you some background information about the distillery itself.
The Lochlea Distillery is a conversion of the farm buildings at Lochlea Farm, situated 8 miles south of Kilmarnock, and at which the world-famous Scottish writer and poet Robert Burns lived and worked from 1777 to 1784. Plans for a distillery by the current owner Neil McGeoch were approved in 2014, and whisky production commenced in August 2018. Malcolm Rennie, who'd previously been distillery manager at the likes of Bruichladdich, Ardbeg, Kilchoman and Annandale, initially worked with Neil as a consultant before coming on board full-time to oversee the birth of the whisky. However, he then left to join the rebirth of the Rosebank Distillery in October 2021 and was replaced by John Campbell, who had previously been the distillery manager at Laphroaig for 16 years. The distillery is another new whisky venture who are producing a grain-to-glass spirit. They grow their own barley in fields literally over the road and have their own water source. The bottle itself features embossing referencing the tyre tracks that surround the farm as well. The third of 4 seasonal releases that represent the farming year, beginning with Sowing and running through Harvest, Fallow and finally Ploughing to be released in early 2023, Lochlea Fallow Edition is matured solely in first fill Oloroso Sherry casks to impart rich fruity flavours that evoke the changing weather of autumn. Although the Sowing Edition was released at a slightly higher ABV of 48%, like the Harvest Edition, this particular release is bottled at 46% ABV.
Right then, so again, very, very dark colour, and I've actually got the rest of the bottles here. So what I have done is I've put a bottle aside of all their releases so far. So at the back I've got a first release, and I've got here an Our Barley, a Sowing, a Harvest as well, with the intention of when Ploughing comes out, that gives me 6 of the first releases from Lochlea, and I'm going to do a tasting event online, hopefully have somebody from the distillery around, and we will go through the first 6 bottlings that they've done. But it's quite interesting already to see the progression, and I will lift these up towards the camera. You might be able to see the progression of colours. So this is the Sowing Edition. So this was first fill bourbon barrels. This is Harvest. And this was the combination of port, sherry and bourbon casks. So already you can see that dark progression, but then we go to the Fallow, and my word, that is pretty dark. And what we also have is that our barley, and you can see it kind of sits in the middle. The port, sherry and bourbon from the Sowing does have a little bit more of a hue to it, but you can see the our barley kind of sits in the middle. So this is ready for me to open, because I'm going to be opening it for the tasting anyway. My eyesight's terrible. There we go. Now this is one of these vertical strip ones that I can never open, and this is what normally happens. You get a tiny little bit of this, and then you have to prat around. I really don't like these seals. I don't know what it is about them. I can never ever, well, I can say I did on the last video that I did, but you've got to then kind of rip it round to try and get the whole thing off. Then you end up with a little sliver of plastic around there that you can't chop off. It's just, they're a pain in the arse, and I'm fed up with these seals, but I'm just going to have to deal with that. So anyway, this is what's going to be used for the tasting event. So it means that I can open it afresh and pour it out for myself. So, oh dear. See, that also gets in the way of being able to pour as well. So, let's get the lid back on there and pop it up there. Absolutely love that colour. It's so good. So 46%, as with the others as well. Would love to try a cask strength version at some point, please, Lochlea people. So, let's see what we're like. What a colour that is. And we're looking at, what are we looking at age-wise? 4.5 years old? And just that amount of colour from it. It's incredible. Absolutely brilliant. Interesting. Very interesting. Now, you might have seen the Lindor's, casks of Lindor's Oloroso that I did recently, and that was very much kind of like rich dark fruitcake straight off the bat. This has all the fruit, but it's not as deep as I was expecting it to be. It's actually a little bit lighter than I was expecting, just in terms of the weight of the nose. There is a lot of raisin, there's a lot of soft spice, but it's not as deep as I was expecting it to be, particularly looking at the colour. There is a higher note to this. There's still that kind of cereal feel coming through. It's fresher almost. It's not as Christmassy as I was expecting it to be. There's a definite, like, lighter, spicier, but a lighter spice feel to it. How interesting. Wasn't expecting that at all. You don't quite get the cereal element that I associate with Lochlea coming through though. You don't get that kind of waves of grain feel, you know, being stood in a field of grain. But I think that would almost be impossible to achieve, as well as have the kind of rich sherry influence from that casks. It's definitely there, it's just not as deep. Deep is the only word I can kind of think of. It's not as deep and dark fruit and dense fruitcake as I thought it might be just looking at the bottle. Not a bad thing, it's just not what I was expecting. And it's the same on the palate. It's not as dense. It's a fruitcake that's a little bit lighter. There's raisins in there, there's prunes, but I'm also getting barley sugar. There's a lighter touch to it. There's a touch of cinnamon, but it's not sweet cinnamon, it's slightly drier cinnamon. I wouldn't say a pepperiness, but there is a slightly drier edge to it. It's very, very interesting, and I do get this note of barley sugar coming through, and I'm wondering if that's that lighter house style is just kind of pushing its way through that sherry influence. There's still bags of dark fruit to it. There's still a lot of raisins, but it's not super concentrated raisins. It's more like raisins that are soaking in whiskey ready to go into a Christmas cake, rather than those raisins that have been soaked and are in the cake and it's really dark and dense. It's that kind of like pre-baking Christmas cake feel. And I really like the fact it's a little bit lighter, because there are lots of sherry bombs out there. You know, the Lindor's I really enjoyed as a deep dark Christmas cake, but sometimes you can have too much of a good thing almost. There's too many deep dark fruity sherry whiskies out there, and I like the fact that this is actually slightly different. It's a little bit lighter. It's actually a little bit almost more approachable. It is, it's lighter. It's a weird kind of like light sherry bomb. And it's very different, and I like the fact it's doing that. I like the fact it's not just overloaded the sherry. There is still maintaining a little bit of the character of Lochlea. It's not, it kind of feels like it's having to fight through a little bit, but it is there. It does feel like they've sort of just kind of reined everything back in again, so that you don't forget that it's Lochlea rather than it's just a heavily sherry matured whiskey. I like that fresh touch to it. It's more of a autumnal whiskey as opposed to a winter whiskey, which is what first fill Oloroso sherries tend to be. You know, they tend to feel like they're a winter whiskey in front of a log fire. This is much more autumnal, and this is the point at which it's coming out. It's actually evoking, again, that time of year. There's clearly some thought going on in this. Clearly some thought of, right, we are releasing this 1st of November, and we are not in the depths of winter. Things are getting a little bit colder. The nights are drawing in, the clocks went back at the weekend. The nights are drawing in, it's starting to feel colder, but it's not freezing cold, it's not snowing. And actually, this suits it really well because this is warming and it's rich, but it's not really, really rich. It's not really deep and dank and rich and warming and all this lot in front of a log fire. It's, might need to turn the heating on for half an hour because it's getting a little bit chilly, but I wouldn't mind warming up with a whiskey as well. It's very, very cleverly done. It's picking up more flavors as well, and it actually allows more of the finish to develop. It's not just sweet fruit. You get a little bit more of a spiciness in there. You get a little bit more of that youthfulness of the whiskey, but without it being, oh, it's too young and everything like that. There's a nice little bite at the end of it, which is absolutely not overpowering, but it stops it from becoming either too sweet, too raisiny, or just a bit flabby. It lifts everything as well. So really, this is a clever whiskey. This is a well-made whiskey that I can tell has had thought involved in it. They've been very, very considerate. However, I would really, really like to see a cask strength version of this. I'd love to know what this is like from cask strength, because obviously we've been bottling at 46% to go in line with everything else. And I feel like it just needs a little bit more of a kick. You know, maybe not 48 maybe, but you know, at 50. And I'd love to know what this is like at cask strength, because it feels like there's something that's it's just been knocked down slightly too much to bring it to 46 in line with the rest of the range, which is absolutely fine, and it drinks really, really well. I'd love to see this at cask strength. I think it could be an absolute belter. But it's still really, really good. And I'm so impressed with what Lochlea are doing. They are making different types of whiskey and yet maintaining a house style within. There is a character to all of them. And in the finish, I'm now getting different things. I'm starting to get like blackcurrant, blackberries. Not summer pudding, but you know, black fruits as opposed to raisins and things like that. Raisins are black fruits. Blackberries, blackcurrants, there's a bit more of a juicy note coming through because it's slightly lighter. Things are changing as I drink it all the time. Very, very good whiskey indeed. And as I said, I'm really liking that Lochlea have managed to do, well, we've done 5 bottlings now with the first release, but with, I suppose you could call these core bottlings because these are first crops, but I believe the seasonal editions will be continuing year on year, I think, that they are different to each other enough that you can have one or all 3 and they're just, you know, they're different enough that they have their own character while still being Lochlea all the way through. There is a thread of Lochlea as a distillery that runs all the way through these. They're doing a brilliant job. Such a good distillery. So, so good. Right, so that's me done. Like I say, ploughing is looking at Burns Night next year with any luck, but it's going to be about January, February of next year. And then that will be the set. So once we get to that time of year, once ploughing comes out, or once I know that there's a date for ploughing, I will start to look at locking down a date for the tasting. So keep an eye out in sort of mid-January. I got a very small allocation of the fallow, and basically they've already gone. So if I manage to get my hands on any more, unlikely, but if I do, head to the website, www.spiritspecialist.com. Get in touch. There will be a page on there which has got the product on, but it will show it's out of stock, but you can click and say notify when back in stock. And if I do get some in, I may well be in touch. But basically, the stock I've got has already gone to people that had already purchased the previous ones from me earlier on. You know, support my business and I will support you. But if you're not on the mailing list, then it's well worth joining that. So get on the website. On the bottom of every page is be in the know or join now or something like that. There's some button, I can never remember what it says on it, but that will get you onto the mailing list and then you'll be able to know when new things are coming out. So that's me done and I shall see you at the next video. Cheers.